Oh, okay, we're live now. Okay. Hi, I'm Jeffrey Wernick. Welcome to another Fine Points. And here I am with Bruce and Ryan. Hi, hope you all had a great weekend. Um, so instead of me doing my usual open, Ryan, why don't you open the show today?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important. We've talked a lot about on the show the kind of the constitutional crisis in this country, which is it's just self-evident. And I think people on all sides of the paradigm are very much aware of it. Whether some of them are defending for a multitude of reasons, why this should be happening now. They know, I think at the core, most of them know that it's wrong. But as it's right now, they're being convinced that the wrong thing for the right reasons makes sense. I think the point is it's still wrong regardless, right? And I think that's what a lot of this is about. And so I wanted to start with the kind of the one of these big examples from San Bernardino. And it's an interesting overlap of points, because one of the things we've been talking about a lot on this show is like for example, with Garcia. I've never tried to make the argument, I think we all agree, that I know for a fact this guy's not a criminal. The evidence doesn't suggest that, at least what we can tell, and even in regard to the immigration part of it, but that the evidence they present does not make that case. And there's so many things like that around this. And so in this case, it's not about trying to get into whether or not these people were illegal immigrants. It's about the reality of how they conducted themselves in this example. And it's a story of people that they were surrounded, and they came up, and yes, they have, you can see clearly they have police vests on. But as we know, there's been, at least in my experience, 3 or 4 examples of like major cases, like a rape, a theft, a robbery, of people who are buying ice vests on Amazon, which you can buy, or like little shirts, and then going in and robbing people. And so that's happened many times, probably more than we can count, or more that we've heard of, rather. And so these people get surrounded. They don't know what's going on. They don't identify themselves. They're masked. There's nothing presented to them. And so they just simply say, get out of the car. And they wait about half a second. They start busting in windows. And so they rightly drive away. Now, whether they even knew that this was actually police and they were taking advantage of the law, they're still within the law. That's what's so crazy, is they're within their rights to, if they're not being identified, they don't know for sure. So they're allowed, like if you're being pulled over, I mentioned off air, by a police officer, the law is that you're allowed to drive until you feel comfortable pulling over, even though most police officers won't be okay with that. That is the reality. So in this case, they drive away. They claim that they ended up hurting 2 officers, but I think in the video you can clearly see that nobody was hurt. They opened fire at the vehicle while it's driving away. That's the part that blows me away the most. This is a civilian location. There's people around, and there's people in the car. I think the reality shows that they don't know for sure whether any of them are. They're profiling, but on top of that, they don't know that everybody in the car is innocent or not. They're firing at this at the car. Then it ended up, after this, we'll talk about after the clip, they ended up going to their house, and where it went from there got even more ridiculous. But here's the clip from the engagement in the street. Oh, Jeffrey, you have to hit it. It's number 1.
What do you want? What do you want? Identification. No, no, what? Hey, you can't do that.
Okay. It's pretty clear that they didn't hit anybody. And they opened fire on the car, which is just insane to me.
No le abras, no le abras, no le abras, no le abras, no le abras. No le abras. Why? No le abras, no le abras. No la puedo abrir, ¿por qué? What do you want? What do you want? Identification. No, la voy a abrir. Hey, you can't do that.
Jeez. I mean, even knowing it's police, you know what I mean? Like, the reality is that you're required, like, they're going, what are you pulling me over for? Right? Like, this is the reality of our legal system, right? Well, I've already said enough. So what do you guys think? I mean, I just think that's whether or not they're even criminals. I mean, it's so far beyond what we're supposed to accept as, the constitutional reality of this country. It's alarming.
Yeah, I mean, what immediately comes to mind, Ryan and Jeffrey, is a flagrant violation of the Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable searches and seizures. They obviously didn't feel free to go. There wasn't any probable cause to believe either that they were here illegally, they committed any kind of crime. There was no warrant. There was no exigent circumstances. A flagrant violation of the Fourth Amendment. And unfortunately, Congress has refused to create a damage remedy. So what do they care? Violate, you have a right, but no remedy here. And moreover, I believe that probably under criminal law, you could probably prosecute these ICE persons for assault. They created an imminent fear of imminent harm. But Trump isn't going to ever prosecute them, no matter how many crimes they committed. And unfortunately, the law is that the state can't prosecute a federal official for acts undertaken in his federal capacity. So you have a huge, huge gap in the law. The Congress isn't going to fix it by altering or amending the law. So we can expect more of the same because there's no incentive to refrain.
When we federalize the police force, and the federal police force under Trump is replacing all state, local police forces, this is what we'll expect to happen. I mean, there at least is some rights when we have against the people who represent us in our local police force, that we have recourse when a cop when a cop abuses or damages or causes physical harm, not in compliance with what the rules and regulations are, that there is only qualified limited immunity, not absolute immunity. I think we can expect in a federalized police force is total immunity, is complete immunity. So there'll be no recourse whatsoever for those who are bad actors, and that'll encourage bad actors to act badly. It might even encourage people who normally would be decent actors to become bad actors. I think if we look at those circumstances, from what I thought I heard in the video, is the person said identification. They refused to identify themselves. And as you pointed out, there are copycats. So how are they supposed to know whether this is a copycat or the real thing? All the police needed to do was identify themselves. They did stop. They didn't look like they were not cooperating. It's when did they take off? They were sitting identification, and what was the response to identification? In we're gonna break your windshield, and we're gonna force our way in. So clearly, it's reasonable for them to have concerns about their personal security. So they just took off when their windshield was busted, because they had no way of knowing who these people really were. This is the consequences of people coming in unmarked cars, with masks on, who refuse to identify themselves. So
but I want to repeat, the remedy is available through the legislative process. The rules can be changed. I mean, after George Floyd, the Congress at least flirted with the idea of eliminating this stupid qualified immunity standard, that has not an impenetrable, very high standard in order to get damages. But we just can't shake our hands, scream and yell at your local, state, federal legislators. Do something, change this. I could be the one that's the next target here. This is ridiculous. But right now they're operating in a legal vacuum. You can violate the Constitution, no penalty, crime without punishment.
Yes, and I wanted to add to a couple of things. One is, it seems clear clear from the subsequent facts that you made reference to, Ryan, is the fact is, it's from what I read from the article, when these people got home, they themselves contacted the police. Right? So
we can go into that next. Yeah, that's an important part of it.
So is there a video on that? Or?
No, but I can bring the article up and we can look at it, but we can just discuss it. I mean, and I can read from it. The simple point is that they went back to their house, right? And so the police, and there's a minor dispute between articles, but so the police then went to their house, surrounded their house, and demanded he come outside, right? And so ultimately the dispute is whether or not ultimately they let him go. Nothing happened. Now the dispute in the articles, which I'm sure we'll flesh out as it goes forward, is that one article is claiming that they detained him at the house and then let him go. The other one's claiming that they just basically, waited, went through information and decided that it wasn't, and then didn't do anything about it. Now, ultimately, they're going back and they are arresting him under the claim that he assaulted police officers. And so this is what's crazy to me, is that you can see in the video, now look, maybe there's something we're missing, but even the reality that, when you're driving straight forward and then you open fire as they're driving away, which seems to be a violation of protocol, if I'm honest, right? I mean, I think that's pretty clear. Then claiming that, you did so because my gut instinct, they're saying this like they've been caught lying 1,000 other times. I can't prove this, because they they're doing that because that's the remedy they can put forward. We want this guy, so we're going to claim that he attacked us. I mean, that's, honestly, this happens a lot with police, whether, I think it should be flushed out whether that's the case and whether they acted accordingly. But the way that they're doing this now is just bull rushing it, like Rose is talking about. They know that there's no consequences. They know they've got the backing of the executive branch. So they're just going, screw it. Let's claim he tried to hit us. We shot at him for it. So let's arrest him and put him in jail under the claim that he, and meanwhile, the original claim is nowhere to be found. Was he a legal immigrant? Did he break the law? Who cares now? We're going after him because he attacked us. It's just
because they want to justify there was a good shooting. So that's all they want to do. They want to
that's probably exactly right.
That's all they want to do. Because yes, you could hear nobody got hit. They were not right on the car. The guy just went sweat. He wasn't swerving to hit anyone. He left going straight to protect himself from people he did not really know who they were because they refused to identify themselves. It's absurd. So I have a couple things to add to it. One is San Bernardino. Which state is that in? San Bernardino,
California.
Okay. Didn't the California judge say they couldn't profile?
I'm sorry.
Yes.
A
federal judge held that you cannot use simply the ethnicity, the color of a person in order to find a reasonable suspicion or cause to think that they're an illegal alien, and put an injunction on that standard. And obviously, they're being violated again.
They're arresting veterans.
Obviously, they were in violation of that court order. Okay.
Yeah.
Obviously, they were in violation of that because if they had a warrant, if this person was a specific target with a warrant, okay, then when they went to that person's house, they would have gone right into the house and detained the person. Okay, but they didn't. So they didn't have a warrant. They were profiling this person. They wanted to stop by because they wanted to then profile them and ask him to show whatever credentials to prove, that he was in the country legally or not. And he was Latino looking in a Latino neighborhood. And so he was the perfect candidate, for them to profile. And, so they're profiling. I pointed out, I was just kind of curious, and the fact is, I'm sure I checked on Grok, how many, because I read somewhere else. It's like, I read that there's like 100 to 150,000 at least illegal Russians in the U.S. Okay. Now I'm sure they're in Russian neighborhoods. Okay. So I doubt they're dispersed. There are some areas that are known for Russia. I don't see many people, the police, going into neighborhoods that are known to have a large Russian population, where there might be a Russian mafia there. And targeting people who look Russian because in Russian neighborhoods, because by that logic, there are people who are not just Latinos who are here illegally, and many of these people from different ethnicities live in communities that are peculiar to, specific to their culture, their where they're from. Because they like, they like to congregate together. Almost all groups do, that come in. They like to congregate together because they want to speak the language that they feel comfortable speaking. They want to go to the restaurants that they like. So it's just natural. There's nothing wrong with it. It's natural for them to congregate around certain neighborhoods. So all these people are easy to find. You can just go into all the ethnic neighborhoods, of which we know a large cohort of them are here illegally. And we can target them, but they don't seem to be going into those neighborhoods. They seem to be mostly focusing on going where the Latinos are.
Except ones in Trump's restaurants and hotels.
Excuse me?
I'm joking. I'm like, not really, but except for the restaurants and hotels of their friends and their inner circle that they made sure were off the table, because they did do that, by the way. Just to making your point even further.
We've seen this rodeo before. That's basically, but the crisis was more intense at World War II. That's the Japanese American concentration camps. You'll notice that they didn't do concentration camps for German nationals. They had white skins.
Yes.
Yep. Japanese.
I mean, it's clear as much as it's
they get there, and you're telling me that the Japanese were a greater threat than Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. We didn't do them either for the Italians.
Yeah, I mean, it's as much as it may be uncomfortable.
This is racism on steroids, and unfortunately, we've had a very long history of racism even after the Civil War, beginning with the Chinese Exclusion Act.
What I was going to say is just as much as it may be uncomfortable for some people to address that, or they pretend it's a left-wing thing, it's undeniable that racism plays a major part in a lot of cultures, including the United States. And it's not, it's not even, that's there, no matter where you look in the world, you'll find pockets of people that think certain ways. It's just, but we have to address the reality of that. My point in saying that is I think some people want to pretend like even pointing at racism is somehow like a left-wing thing, or somehow it's like a manipulation. It's very obvious that that's a major thread that runs through what's going on right now. I wanted to bring up this. Could you bring up the screen share real quick, Jeffrey? It'll pop up in 1 second here. This one right here. Can you bring up that one to the left? I wanted to read this. It's from the article. It makes a point you were making.
Oh yes, I see it right now.
Yeah, the article. Just click on that one for me. There we go. So this is the article. It says, despite never, this is now they're at the house, just like you were saying, by the way. Despite never presenting a warrant, they remained at the house, encircling it until 3:45 p.m., pressuring the individual to come outside and placing the entire family in fear. It says this is the clear abuse of power, firing at civilians, detaining families without cause, and silencing community voices is unacceptable. One of the organizations speaking on this. DHS said local police located the subject at a residence and briefly had him in custody. So that's one of the local police. So this to me tells me that he wasn't the guy they were even looking for, right? They get him in custody. He's not an illegal alien or whatever it is. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm saying clearly they let him go after they had him in custody and then left, and then later came back and arrested him for, the idea of going after the officers. So the decision was made despite the subject refusing to comply and wounding 2 officers. That's what they're claiming. Another terrible example of California's pro-sanctuary policies and action that shield criminals instead. That's what they're trying to make it out to be. It's the Democrats that wouldn't let us go after him. That has nothing to do with why they chose to do either of those 2 things, but it shows you the scapegoat. As long as you can go, Democrats are the reason. It's the other side. Far too many people will just kind of go, oh, well, it's okay because the Democrats are worse, or whatever the broken logic is, So I thought that was important to kind of point out. And then I've got one more video, by the way, that kind of adds to this, the next one, number 3, which just shows you the point we were making before, where
I'll end it now.
They're confronted about what they're doing, and they say, but you're ruining this country, and their response is, well, the liberals ruined it first. So this is this broken logic where, well, you started it. What do you mean, kindergarten? You're doing the wrong thing is the point, and everyone just keeps pretending like it's justified because the other side.
Yo, let's see some badge. Yo, let's see some badge work. Boys, let's see some badge work.
Do I have to answer to you?
Yes.
You got to answer to somebody.
So
yes.
Wait, so you guys are just masked? We're just masked up?
Who are you?
Who are you guys?
I don't care, my guy.
You don't care what agency?
You don't care.
Bro, what agency you guys with? Are you guys working for the U.S. government or not?
Back the fuck up.
Can I see some badge work,
Back
sir?
up.
Sir, can I see some badge?
He said back the fuck up was the first thing he said, right?
Is your...
Yeah.
That's how you speak to a citizen.
So you guys are
Back
ruining
the
this
fuck up.
country. You know that, right? Liberals already ruined it.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Right. So politically motivated, violating the law, and as Jeffrey points out, like these are people paying your tax dollars are paying your salary. It's just insanely obvious. These people feel no accountability. They're violating the law. They're not presenting themselves. They're not presenting warrants. It's insane. Like, this is so far beyond the pale. And I refuse to believe that there's a majority of conservatives that at least claim to care about the Constitution that think that that's okay. As much as we are, it's hard to see that through all the nonsense, but maybe I'm wrong. I feel like we're being played right now in a large way.
No, but I go back. If they are really conservative and they cared, they'd be lobbying the legislatures to change the law, have a remedy. Right now, there is no remedy.
Yeah.
You will not find a single ICE member who has been sanctioned since January 20th, 2025. So what would you do? They get maybe a medal or a trophy if they do illegalities, as long as the victim, is a Hispanic or somebody who is not white. So they're going to respond to the incentives the same way that the market works. Right. And if you care, you got to change the law. Right now, the law has a vacuum, a perfect vacuum for these guys. There is no risk whatsoever to any detriment for violating the Constitution 5 times a day.
Now, would you say we have to change the law, or say that we have to uphold the law? Because isn't it the case that they're just ignoring it, or is there laws in place that allow it?
Right now, the status right now is that there is no damage remedy against the officers for violating clear violations of your constitutional rights. And the courts have said Congress has to create the remedy, or it can be provided perhaps by local officials. That is the issue. We know that we can't expect self-discipline or internal remedies because they're all on the same team, right? It's like having the Fox, police themselves. But when you have when the victim is given a remedy of damages and attorney's fees, like they do in this typical civil rights cases, then at least you have some deterrent there. And then you can get some kind of relief. And once the officer pays once, then you're going to find the deterrence will kick in. And that can be done. They can retain me. I will draft the statute. It's pretty simple. There are many other provisions like this in the civil rights laws, but that has to happen. Again, you will never see any of these people being disciplined, suffering anything in their jobs because of what they've done.
And I guess, and I'm not sure, but the person who was detained in San Bernardino that was let free, and then charged, now brought with arrest for the charge of assaulting police officers, might be the case that after they checked out that he was here legally. So because there's no news that he's reporting him as being illegal. So
Right.
this might be a legal person. It seems like it was probably a legal person, but we don't know for sure. But again, I think it's a fair assumption if he was here illegally, Gateway Pundit and all those other places would have said, look at these illegal aliens that tried to kill some cops, who stopped them.
Can I have one more point too?
Article. So they probably are here legally. So they just stopped them just because they were Latino looking. Now, one person sent a comment, I'm told, that said they shouldn't be here in the first place. Good enough for them. Well, it seems like the first guy might have been here legally, and I guess it's good enough for him because he's Latino looking, and we should stop every Latino looking person. Even if the majority of the Latino looking persons are here legally, we should just stop them because they're Latino looking, and because some Latinos have come that are illegal, we should stop every single Latino person, who's a potential criminal, because they came. And I have to consistently remind people, that crossing the border undocumented is a civil infraction. You're not a criminal for crossing the border, It's a civil infraction. That's all it is, a civil infraction, And I think many people who send these type of comments in should not say good enough for them, We have a Constitution. If you don't believe in the Constitution, that's fine, Some people don't believe in the Constitution and they don't believe in a process of rule of law, But this Constitution applies to everyone, who's in our jurisdiction. So there's a process. There's a process. I guess people think that somebody comes across the border undocumented, who has never committed a crime in their life, who's not even committed, they're not even looking for that person because they committed a crime other than a civil infraction of crossing the border without the right paperwork. That's all they've done, or overstayed their stay here after they did the paperwork and their time period expired and they kept staying in the country. Again, civil infraction. I guess people think that they should be treated worse than serial killers. So,
or child predators that get sent back to their home country when they get caught because there's so many inconsistencies right now with the way our government deals with crime, and it's clearly based on either racial intentions or political intentions. It's the point about the identification. I like the guy's comment. It's good enough for me. First of all, the frustrating thing is that certain people like that claim they care about the Constitution, but then also support something like that. And it's like, that shows me ignorance, whether willful or otherwise. They don't either understand what they think they believe, and that comes from misinformation from people they follow. But so let's just say the guy is being arrested, right? And knows very well, look, you can easily argue that common sense suggested they were cops, right? You can see it on their vests. That doesn't change the law. So this idea that somehow they're just maneuvering using the law. Okay, good for them. Isn't that what lawyers do every day? It's like the reality is the law, and they simply said you need to identify yourselves because that's the reality, right? So this idea that they are just knowingly playing them, it's like the only people doing that are the other side that are not following the law, and then abuse that to go after people that simply know the law which drives them crazy, is in my experience anyway, when, like people that will, when they get pulled over at a traffic stop and they basically run them through, the realities of what they're allowed to do. And cops just can't stand that because they largely, in my experience, have been trained away from those things, right? But the point at the end of the day is that this is the reality. And if you're on the side of it where you're supporting them breaking the law for whatever reason, whatever intention, you're on the wrong side of history, of everything.
Yeah, well, the wrong side of the Constitution, too. There's a legitimate reason why you want to have persons who are coming in and suggesting they want to arrest or interrogate, that they identify themselves. The reason is that's how you hold them accountable. Right. That if they misbehave, you know their name and you can report them. It isn't just trying to be pestiferous and harassing. It's important information that deters wrongdoing.
If these people ended up the judge said they can't profile, correct?
Yes.
So until it's overturned, if it is overturned, that's the law in California, right?
Yeah.
So they profiled, they committed a crime. So as you pointed to, reinforce your point. So now, if he says these people illegally profiled, and you go and you want to file a report, exactly what you said, Bruce, who was it that did it? I don't know.
Right.
No identification.
Yeah.
So the whole point, you're right, Bruce. The whole point is that they have to identify themselves, because if they deprived you of your constitutional rights, you have a right to know who did it.
And there's obviously precedent in history of that happening all the time. So there's clearly reason to do that. One more thing about the legality in this country, we've all talked about this, is that we understand that the majority, which as far as I could tell, the numbers of people they're going after are either legally in this country with no criminal record, or in some limbo state also with no criminal record. And that's what's so frustrating, is that, so like you're saying, Jeffrey, somebody comes to the country, maybe he just ends up in a situation where they didn't plan for, but recognizes, I'm going to go to the United States and seek citizenship, claim sanctuary, or whatever it is, but I want to be a citizen. Isn't that what they all pretend is the reality? And then they go in the country, they go through, they present themselves and say, I want to be a citizen. There's a limbo state there where they're not here as a legal citizen yet, but they're not here illegally. There's another point to what you're saying. And that at the end of the day, those seem to be targeted right now. People who are even in the process of becoming
they can track.
Card.
They're the easy ones to track.
Right.
The ones who come in, report that they're here, they're applying for asylum, that they have the legal right to do,
or visa, or green card,
while they're in the process of applying for asylum and going through the procedures.
Right.
They're the ones that are the easiest to track. So the people who are trying to do the right thing are the ones we're persecuting. Okay.
Yeah, they show up at courtrooms. These people go to court to report, and then for doing the right thing, they hang out and say, "Okay, now I'll detain you." For making clear that you're going to comply with the rules. It really is completely crazy. But it goes back to the incentives. This is not going to diminish until there is an incentive of ICE to comply with the law. Right now, they can commit all the illegalities in the world. Nothing adverse ever happens to them. And if you want to have real teeth in the enforcement, you don't give it to ICE peers and think that they're going to discipline their subordinates. They're not. You give a private cause of action for damages when you can prove a violation of your constitutional rights. But right now, that private right of action has to come from the Congress or the state legislatures. You got to try to do this. Otherwise, we can have all the words in the world. It isn't going to change anything.
Yeah, and Brian, you made a good point also, I think, with respect to why aren't you seeing ICE at all the hotels of Trump's friends? Waiting for the people to leave work and grabbing them as they leave work. So, and being outside of there, why aren't they doing that? I mean, clearly, this is a discriminatory practice. They're cherry picking who they're going after. So, this is racist and discriminatory in application.
And there are a lot of innocent people being caught up in all of this. We've talked about. I mean, I can't even count how many examples we've talked about just on this show. Play this number 4 clip. Children. And it's the way that they're just go play it. It'll speak for itself. It's just so disgusting what all this is.
Canadian toddlers, both under the age of 4, have been held in custody by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement this year. And one of those children was held for 51 days under the age of 4. This is based on new data obtained by the Globe and Mail. Nearly 150 Canadians have been detained by ICE officers this year, so 149. That is on pace to double the number of Canadians detained when we look at the entirety of 2024. For a closer look at these detentions, I'm joined in studio by Catherine Blaisbaum with the Globe and Mail. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
You know, I have 3 children. I know what they're like when they're little. I mean, thinking about the fact that these 2 children, they're little, under the age of 4 years old, held in these facilities. Who are these kids? What do we know about them? And what do we know about the conditions?
I, too, am a mom of 3, and it was horrifying reading through details about the facility where they were being held. So what we do know is that these 2 children were held for weeks. One of them held for more than 7 weeks at a facility in South Texas that is at the center of allegations of not providing adequate drinking water, mothers who can't access formula for their babies, no soap to clean their bottles, children who don't have toys, guards taking, a doll away from a little girl, no access to medical treatment or reduced access to medical treatment. So very challenging circumstances for these families, including these 2 Canadian children. We do know that both of them have been released. They were detained separately. These are 2 separate families, we understand, based on the data. Both detained in May, one released a couple weeks later, and then the other one, the data showed that this person and their grown-up, along with another child, were released in mid-July.
Do you know why they were detained, like what the reason was?
What we do know, based on the data analysis, is that they were detained with what appear to be grown-ups. We don't know if they are their mothers, but in the case of one of the children, it was a Bolivian mother. In the other, it was a Congolese woman, and it appears that they were picked up for what are known as other immigration violations, so no criminal record, but rather some other immigration violation, and they have been placed into what are described as expedited removal proceedings with a credible fear referral. So they are claiming
what
that
does that mean?
Yeah, they are claiming that if they are sent home, that they fear persecution.
Got it.
And now, we don't know what happened to them. We don't know where they are. We are actively trying to find them. They're just one of many people who are
being held right.
Yeah, so clearly going after the worst of the worst, right? Which we keep hearing. All the rapists and murderers, it's just anybody that gets caught, it seems.
I'm waiting for Kristi Noem to hold a press conference and saying, here's the evidence. I wish I could show you, but it's part of a legal filing. But these kids are really TDA. They're sleeper cells, and they're going to be trained so that by the time they're adults, they could be part of an army that's going to overthrow the United States. We have the evidence on it. Okay, trust us. Okay, I'm waiting for somebody, because they always end up saying something stupid like that.
It wouldn't be that surprising, to be honest, whether 4-year-old or not. Like, if that's how dumb this has gotten so far, just sprawling, ridiculous, flailing arguments that have nothing to do with the facts, and then they get proven to be wrong 30 seconds later, and as Bruce, no accountability. Just circles around.
Yeah, well, remember, with regard to the hypocrisy, the United States, the Trump administration then worked to get hardened criminals, sometimes 3 and 4 violent criminals. They're released from El Salvador, or they go to Venezuela. Remember, that was the deal to get them back here. They have ignored the violent crimes committed by the so-called witnesses against Abrego Garcia. Suddenly, they get immunity, they get special visa privileges if they'll make up stories against Abrego Garcia. These are proven violent criminals. It's not just charges. They had a criminal trial and were convicted.
Right.
They treat them with soft gloves as long as they'll do their political bidding.
Right. Very clear. I mean, this is what's so frustrating for people that, are trying to argue this is what's best for the country. There's no way around it. This is, even if it's, like I said, the intention is that this will bring us back. If we go this route with that aim, it will ruin this. It's already ruined this country. It will destroy us. And that's what's happening.
I have a question. In the last 10 years, what was the most violent day in Washington, D.C.?
In Washington, D.C., it was January 6, 2021.
Okay. So in those multiple hours of seeing all the people, all the violence that day, when did Trump call in the National Guard? Oh, I forgot he didn't call them in.
He didn't. Oh, Mike Pence did that. Trump didn't do anything.
I will say really quickly, though, I think I probably have a different opinion about the reality of January 6th, though. I think that there's probably plenty of other more violent days. I think the reality of that was there's plenty of violence. And let's not forget, a lot of it was very clearly, undeniably coordinated, driven by actors, whether within the government or not. This is verified fact at this point. And I'm not even talking about statements from politics. Like, it's very clear. There was, agent provocateurs, there were FBI agents, there was military. They were very clear, and including people like Epps that were, so the point of all that is there was an effort to drive people to action. And at the end of the day, which you can clearly see at the larger point, most people that were there were not conducting violence. Not to say that there was no violence, though. That's important to say that first part. But the claim of even deaths is also not true. So it's a little bit of an over character, mischaracter. It's mischaracterizing what actually happened.
Listen, I understand your point, Ryan, and it's a sound point. But I would add, it's a different level of crime when you're chanting "Hang Mike Pence," the vice president, wanting to kill him and his family, which probably would have happened. If he wasn't rescued, so to speak, and the president of the United States watches it and does nothing for an hour and almost 3 hours, and Mike Pence as the one who ultimately has to call in, the military to suppress the insurrection. And
I also disagree. That's what we're talking about.
Nothing like that in the last 10 years. And it's true. I mean, there are a very large number who were not violent. But the purpose, those who were violent were not being restrained by the ones who are nonviolent. And their purpose was clear. The chant was "Hang Mike Pence." And they built up a noose. They were ready to hang him. And I don't think it was just figurative.
Yeah, but but my point is, though, it's important to interlock that. Like, I'm not disagreeing. Like, and my opinion. I think this is an all of government. There's undeniable amounts of evidence that show that this was a manipulation. And I'm not talking about right. But
I have to disagree with you here.
Well, okay, go ahead.
Let me tell you why I disagree with you. Anytime there's a threat of when there are violent groups, okay. One is there was evidence that groups were having communications that they wanted to overthrow the government and they wanted violence and they were going to do this. They were groups there. What does the FBI do with these groups? They infiltrate them. Okay, this is their standard operating procedures. Is they implement whenever these types of rallies or any types of thing, they always infiltrate these types of organizations
and then usually run them from the front. Yeah,
and well, some of them run them, some of them they don't. But there's no evidence that the people who were doing this, these groups. Because at that point in time, I was involved with Parler, and so I know that the chief policy officer of Parler was sending things that she thought was appropriate to share with the FBI. Okay, on Parler, of people who were looking like they were trying to they were making threats of violence. For January 6th. So there's been no evidence. Yeah. There's been no evidence in trial that any of these people were FBI agents. Okay.
Oh, I wasn't saying that.
FBI agents might have infiltrated some of these organizations, but they weren't running these organizations. The leaders of these organizations.
We can't say that for sure, to be honest.
We have no evidence that they have been.
Yeah, but let me add to what Jeffrey's saying. Let me add to what Jeffrey's saying, Ryan, and that is, there's a defense called entrapment. If these people really were being manipulated by the FBI, they would raise that defense. There wasn't a single one of the thousands of people charged who raised an entrapment defense.
But that's not I'm not disagreeing with any of this. My point, but claiming that it wasn't raised does not mean it didn't happen. So the point, that's what I was trying to flesh out in the beginning, was not about all of the nuance of this. We can get into it if you'd like. I mean, I've covered it for a very long time. My point, though, is that about the most violent day. That's what I was trying to address, is that the idea is that there's a lot of nuance to the way this went down. And so to make it kind of a counterbalance to but trust me, I get where you're going with this. Like the idea that we're going to deploy the National Guard at the 30-year low of DC violence was just, regardless, same point. You could argue the Democrats were lying about the violence. Like, there's obviously always that going on, but it's a ridiculous argument to deploy that when it's not as violent as he's claiming, especially when there was a day where there was a lot of, like, whether there was even like threats of violence and like actual violence on the day. You have people who are pushing, the way they were conducting themselves, even just that big of a mob, in some cases in the past have justified in their minds the National Guard. So from that perspective alone, it's inconsistent. That's the point we're making, right? And I agree with that. But in the January 6th side of it, though, I just think there's a lot of nuance that deserves conversation about the way that went down, about how the governments of both sides were playing elements of this. That's
Ryan,
all.
Ryan,
Point for today.
whatever that, it was extremely violent day. Members of Congress were fleeing for their lives.
Yeah.
There were some people who provided testimony that they were on the phone with their family, okay, saying they were going to die that day and they were going to say goodbye to that.
Okay, but this is all superficial, though. These are all their opinions and their framing. I don't disagree, though. I'm just saying.
The point is, while this is going on, okay, Trump did not call the National Guard.
Yeah,
He did.
I agree.
He was watching it. He was watching it with his popcorn, his Big Macs, okay, whatever he was probably eating, and he was having a good time. Okay, there's no evidence that he was not enjoying it. Okay, if he wasn't offended by the violence. Okay?
Well, okay, but can I say one thing real quickly though? We're
or
saying the
not?
same thing about the National Guard and how we responded. I think they're all ridiculous, and I'll make fun of everybody. But when we get into he feels this way and he thought that, like, these are personal. We don't know that. We don't know what he thought or what his intentions were. But I don't disagree with you though, right?
No,
I mean,
but Ryan, I think they're omitting Ryan. Wait, Ryan.
Watching it. We know that people were going in constantly appealing to him to do something, and he ignored it. We know that.
Yeah,
There's
I
no
don't-
testimony to that effect.
And the testimony also, Ryan, is that when Mr. Trump was informed about the hang Mike Pence and the danger to his family and himself, according to testimony, he said, maybe he deserves it, or who cares, something like that.
Let's be clear. If we're framing this like I'm defending Trump, that's not what's happening. Okay, like, you guys know my opinion of him and Biden and all of the government. I just think it matters to include the facts that are usually left out of this conversation, right? But that clearly is not relevant to the point we all agree on, which is that yes, there's inconsistency around there's hypocrisy around what they do here and don't do there. I just, I think we get pulled in almost by design, by the way, around the different narratives that make up whatever January 6th was, instead of addressing that we all agree that there was violence that day. And that if we were going to make a case to do it now, why didn't we do it then? We all agree with that.
Yeah, well, or even during the first Trump term, when the incidence of crime in the DC was greater than it is now, he didn't do anything.
Yeah, exactly.
So what explains the discrepancy? Just as a different political game plan. But I
Let's-
want to go back.
That's what it is.
It comes, in my view, it comes back always to the fact that Congress is AWOL. There are these abuses. There's no oversight hearings. There's nothing. They just sit there. They don't enact any laws. And we cannot rely only on the courts. They're slow. They're expensive. Whatever. Congress is supposed to be the first responders to violations of the Constitution. You know why? Because they're endowed with the impeachment power. They can remove persons. They don't have criminal trials. They don't need proof beyond a reasonable doubt. They can remove people from positions of power if they become untrustworthy stewards of our liberty and the rule of law.
Sure wish they remembered
If
that.
they actually exercise that power, they would do it once and they wouldn't have to do it anymore, because people love power. They're not going to do that.
Yeah.
Congress is the chief culprit here. That we would call it nonfeasance, abdication. They do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
They're not limited. The Supreme Court has said Congress does impeachment, no other branch can interfere.
Because they gain from this stuff just like the Trump administration does, in my opinion. Like, whether in the moment their political interests are being appeased or reached, it's clear that in the long run, the status quo that they're creating benefits all the people in power. At the end, I think they all sense that, even that they really hate each other at the end of the day. And so that's why we come to this point all the time where I'm like, I completely, entirely agree with you. But if we notice that Congress is completely, circumvent, whatever the word you want to use, they're not acting in the way they should, and clearly they don't seem to care about that. I just don't know where we go from there. We've gotten to this point many times, and I know
you go from there, Ryan. You go from there by saying, vote him out of office. The citizens need to stand up and say, you don't exercise your job. We're going to fire you like a CEO gets fired if they're not doing their job. And Jeffrey can tell you how you fire CEOs. That's the remedy. That is what Franklin meant when he told And then he said, we have a republic if you can keep it. He understands it's not going to operate on cruise control. And we have such a dilapidated, decayed culture, citizen culture, that everyone thinks, no, it's not my job. Somebody else needs to do it, not me. Well,
people are listening.
You know where that's going to lead you.
Yeah. I just hope people hear this,
If you see his abuses, the abuses of the Alien Enemies Acts, the abuses of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, everything, his abuse of his justification for sending the National Guard and the Marines into California, his abuse of sending the National Guard in, and now other Republicans are joining and sending more National Guard, to DC. If you see these
violations of Comitatus, by the way,
these abuses
cross border,
we had a campaign. Okay, we had a campaign where Democrats brought up an issue. Let's read Project 2025. Okay, and then you'll know what Trump will doing. And what did Trump say? Project 2025? Never heard of it. Don't know anyone involved in writing it. Okay. And whatever it is, I know whatever it is, even though I've never read it, I'm not in agreement with any of it. Okay. That's what he said. Okay. That's what he said. And what are they implementing? Okay. The person that now they just appointed to replace the BLS is a 2025 person, author of it. Russ Voigt from the OMB, another one of these things. So he's brought in people. I guess we should take his word for it. He didn't know any of these people were affiliated with the Project 2025 report. And one of the things that Project 2025 was advocating as part of 2025 was declaring the Insurrection Act and sending the military in to all the blue cities, the major blue cities, and taking over all them. So what are we seeing from right now? Okay,
right.
This is a test case. Okay, a trial. These are part of trials that he's not going to stop at DC. Okay, that he's gonna at some point he's gonna say, look how well it worked in DC. I'm going to declare the Insurrection Act, and you all love me, and I'm going to clean up all these cities. So be happy that Insurrection Act, and I'm going to go in, and don't worry, the courts. I'm telling the courts, you don't have a right. I can declare an Insurrection Act. I believe there's an insurrection, and you can't judge whether there's a legitimate insurrection or not because I say it is, okay? And so far, the courts have deferred to that judgment. The courts have so far deferred to say, if you say you're emergency, we take your word for it. There's no criteria. You just say it is, and those words are the word of God, and fine. And who are we to make a judgment on whether they're constitutional or not? Or that was the public meaning interpretation of what those words meant, okay? So right now he's been pretty unstoppable, and so this is the person who said, I'm going to eliminate mail-in ballots. I mean, after having a conversation with Putin and after the two of them agreed that the election was stolen in 2020. So let's go in and eliminate all the voting machines and the mail-in ballots, and send in Putin to help oversee. Why don't we have the Russian FSB come in and oversee our elections? Maybe that'll be the next thing.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about
recruiting FSB agents to help support. Okay, maybe he'll be recruiting them, and maybe they can become part of ICE and FSB agents, and they can help, guarantee, the integrity of our elections. So, I mean, this is what's coming. And yes, Bruce is right, in the fact that Congress is silent on all this stuff, and I can tell you, I think what's going to happen, this is a prediction. I hope I'm wrong. Okay. Trump right now, if you look at the letter, I circulated the letter to the group on the IEEF, PF, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, where what Sauer's argument that he sent to the courts had nothing to do with law, nothing to do with law. The same thing as their argument for immunity. Okay, you can't have a presidency if you don't have total immunity. It just doesn't work. It's not practical. That there was no constitutional argument. There was a practical argument made. There was not a legal argument made. So now what Trump say is we have all these trillions of dollars. Of course, they're exaggerated. Funds committed that we can't give back. Well, I don't know how you can give back something you haven't received to begin with. Okay, so you haven't gotten it. And is it going to him? Is it going to the U.S. government? Or are these people committed to doing investments in it? And are they agreeing that they're only doing investments that don't make any economic sense? And on the most part, a lot of the people who made commitments in the first administration never wrote the checks that they promised to write, even though, so they were, there's a difference between a non-binding promise, that's not even a letter of intent. They're not even giving a letter of intent. Okay. So, well, they're saying, yeah, I'm thinking about making this trillions of dollars of investment, and I'll do it in several years, and don't worry. But we'll see what the world looks like then. And if it makes sense, they'll do it. If that makes sense, it doesn't. And the most one, it doesn't make sense that they do this stuff. But what's going to happen is the governments keep taking in, so what's going to happen is now, because the government didn't get an injunction, they wouldn't allow an injunction on the tariffs when the two court rulings ruled against the application of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Two places judged that it was unconstitutional, that it was illegal, and then when it went to the court said, well, when we get around to it, we'll make a final judgment on it. But meanwhile, he can keep collecting tariffs. And what's going to happen? The court might get around to it in October, November, December, whatever. By that point in time, there'll be a lot more money in it. And Trump will argue, you're going to destroy the economy if we have to pay back all this money that we collected it. And what will the judges say? Oh, we don't want to destroy the economy. He's telling us we'll destroy the economy. So even though it's not constitutional, we don't want to be the court that destroyed the economy. So we're going to, so we're going to say that this is okay. Okay, mark my words. Okay, we'll see what happens. I hope I'm proven wrong, but I'm making that predictions that the court will treat this like it did the immunity decision, where they make a decision based upon what they think is practical for the moment. But they pretty much guaranteed that outcome, pretty much, I think, by not having an injunction, because every month more and more money comes, and that's more and more money that has to pay back, and that makes it more legitimate, the argument that he makes, that we've collected all this tariff money, and we got a big deficit, and it'll be worse if we have to pay back this tariff money, even if the collection of it was illegal. It doesn't make a difference. If I went up and held up a whole bunch of people, okay, with a gun, took their money, and basically the money I stole was money that I funded the government, but I needed to fund the government, and giving it back will bankrupt the government. That's basically the argument, is I stole this money, but at this point in time, the consequences of this theft would be so bad because I've been living off of everything I'm stealing. So so you don't want to cause that much harm. So you don't look at the fact that it's all stolen contraband. Look at the fact of what the consequences will be to the country, and the consequences will be bad. So you should let me just keep it. So
it goes back, Jeffrey, your observations just go back to my refrain. Congress is the ultimate source here. Congress is not bound by that. I mean, they're stealing the power from the Congress. Congress has the power of the purse. James Madison in Federalist 44 said the power of the purse is what gives the legislative branch, in his words, a trump card over the executive, because they can use the money clause to prevent or force whatever they wish. And now we have the Congress sitting there. They see they're being raped, and they're consenting to it. There's nobody standing up and saying, wait a minute, you can't do this. And I'm saying, all you need to do is once. You impeach him, you have articles of impeachment, and you've usurped the power of the purse. We're impeaching or removing for office. It would stop. Never happen again. And that is where the focus has got to be. Otherwise, where it's sticking your finger in the dike, maybe you get a court decision here or there. If Congress doesn't step up to the plate, it has way more power than the judicial branch does, because it has the power of the purse. We're done.
Yeah.
This cannot be cured without a bona fide legislative branch that's exercising its prerogative, with the citizens demanding that it be done.
This is why, Jane. Excuse me. I'm so passionate about this. Sorry. This is why James Madison said, when you get all the branches of government under one party rule, you have tyranny. Okay. So this is a system without checks and balances, and this is what happens when you have a system without checks and balances. And it would happen the same if the Democrats, when the Democrats control all the branches of government. So this is not, we don't want to be, the three of us pride ourselves in being not partisan. So we don't want to sit back and say the Democrats don't behave as badly when they have a system without checks and balances. The point is, we need a system of checks and balances. Okay. The only way to stop this abuse of power is when there's competition. Okay. And basically when all powers, when all the go under one party, that eliminates the competition. And if you have a strong president who's reasonably popular with his base, then there's a high cost associated with being independent, no matter what that person does. So so we have the conditions, for tyranny, and that's what we're seeing. I'd like to.
I think real quick, one point off what you said real quick, Jeffrey, is that's the thing I think I see more than anything, is that maybe they recognize that too, and that's why we only have one party. That's what I think the reality is today. And
I think it's even worse than that. I believe that, we have this idea, that the elected branches of government somehow have the right to trample on unalienable rights. We've lost the fact that the purpose of government is to protect unalienable rights, which means even the majority can't take them away. Even a supermajority can't take them away.
Right.
Even unanimity can't take them away. That was the breathtaking, electrifying element of the Declaration of Independence. They are unalienable, and the reason we have governments is to protect the unalienable rights, not to destroy them. And so when you hear these arguments, well, he won an election, he got a mandate to do X, Y, Z. In the United States, you can't have a legitimate mandate to destroy unalienable rights, which chiefly are liberty, the right to march your own drummer, the right to develop your faculties, pursue your ambitions, free from government intrusion. And because we've cast those aside as our lodestars in favor of big government, get a lot of money, be a bully around the world, we see all these underlying values, that have been jettisoned in the framing, leads to the big government, and government's got to do X, Y, Z. No, our greatness is get back, downsize government. I mean, the idea that Elon Musk and Trump have a serious effort to get back to the downsizing that the framers envisioned, it's laughable. It's completely laughable. It couldn't happen overnight, but you got to get back to like 1/20th of the size of the government in order to limit it to its proper functions. Again, their proper functions protect our unalienable rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That is it. Nothing more.
Agreed. I wanted to quote from Sinclair Lewis, who said, "When fascism comes to the United States, it will be wrapped in the American flag and will claim the name of 100% Americanism."
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what we're living today. I think Sinclair Lewis, as many people who were social commentarists, in the early part of the 20th century, have proved to be very accurate of where the U.S. is going, and I think that's the reflection of what the MAGA movement is. It's a mostly, I think, a fascist movement, and if you can see golden shares in companies, charging fees for, even if the Constitution doesn't allow it, export fees. If you want to sell certain things to certain customers, that you have to pay the government a toll to be able to export, according to the criteria, of Trump. I don't know where it'll go, if there'll be this ruling about, I know one person's now, I think Schiff wants to investigate, the Paramount Skydance merger, because of the, should the $16 million payment be considered a bribe? So, I think there's a reasonable case that it is a bribe. It might not have been, but it kind of looks suspicious that the authorization came just days after the payment was made. So then you have to ask a question: what was holding the deal up until after the payment? Why was the deal not authorized prior to the payment? So
I just think it's funny though that they like, it matters, obviously, right? There's if this is illegal, but it's funny to me that these people in positions of government power would focus on something like that when there is massive amounts of bribery, lobbying. That's kind of a joke, but I mean that. But like actual bribery, like real crime, not under the guise of lobbying, that exists every single day that they're all involved in. So my thought is, why? What's his motivation to focus on this out of all the other crimes we could highlight? It's interesting.
But it's even worse than that. Adam, bribery, it's listed in Article 2, Section 4 as an impeachable offense.
Right.
Now, impeachment is a matter of congressional investigation. Why does Adam Schiff think that he doesn't have any responsibility? At least put it on the table. We need to investigate this. If it's bribery, it's an impeachable offense. We can go forward.
Yes.
I mean, this is the members of Congress believe their image of themselves is little fleas and ants, and it's kind of sitting at the side and kibitz. They totally abdicated any sense of responsibility for anything. It's always somebody else do it, not me. Somebody else do it, not me. Now, I'm sure Adam Schiff's a politician. So I'm sure he's ulterior motive. He thinks, hey, if you look at this, maybe you can throw dirt at the Republicans. But the whole idea of separation of powers is that if the separation works, people will do the right thing for the wrong reason. That's why it works, because it doesn't depend upon virtuous virtuous legislators. But Congress but he's not there defending the institution of Congress. He's just saying, okay, politically could help us if we kind of cast aspersion on Trump and this particular deal.
You made a really important point there, Bruce, about the idea, and this happens everywhere, about like using the conversation, the momentum, maybe even bringing it in front of some kind of a court, but never seeing accountability. Like it never ever ends up, and like right now they're talking about Clinton and pay to play, which should have been, that's crazy to conversation. It was so obvious 2016 in front of Congress, nothing happened, or any number of things with Trump, that it never actually amounts to that. And so I think you're right. I think this is about using it for political benefit, for certain conversations, but never do they really want to go after him, because like you said, they could impeach him if they wanted to, and they won't.
Yeah, you're exactly right. They're all cowards up there, but they're going to stay there. I mean, I have a conversation with Thomas Massey there, congressman from Kentucky. He says, Bruce, what's more scandalous than the way Congress acts is why the citizens keep voting to return these people.
True.
And ultimately, that is only thing that's going to change their minds and behavior. They get voted out of office, and we still have the right to vote and eliminate them. Now, one of the problems that we have is the kind that Congress has become so tawdry, it's hard to attract really high quality people like Thomas Massey to run. But and that's another thing that I believe needs to be changed in our culture. I mean, when I'm growing up and I'm reading the books, textbooks, there's celebrations of Daniel Webster and Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun and other great figures, even John Quincy Adams in the House. The legislative branch was something. We said it's an honorable that they, in fact, were oftentimes the political leaders. They had more clout politically nationwide than the presidents did. We need to get that idea back. I mean, right now, when you are taught civics in the United States, high school, college, even post, it's all the presidency, right? The president has the power. James McGregor Burns, all the people who write these textbooks, they all believe in presidential power uber alles, because they were written at the time that James Eastland was stopping the Civil Rights Act and they had racists in Congress. But they extrapolated from those races. Oh, now the institution is horrible and bad. Presidential power is everything. And kids grow up, they think the presidency is everything and Congress is a nothing. That needs to change. We need to celebrate the Congress. Yeah, it's more representative, it's more accessible. And moreover, it doesn't have any incentive like the executive branch to run around and spy on all of us and go to wars at the drop of a hat. The educational, what I call mal-education is epidemic.
Yeah. And I think by design. I very much do think that. I think it's about a slow shifting, and it's not just one powerful thing, right? I think there's multifaceted agendas, corporations, but at the end of the day, our education system has been bastardized 17 times over, in different, even like we've even talked about on the show, even like the basis for these things, it's modeled after like a Prussian-based school system, which is really the way the style was meant to produce obedient workers. It's a historical fact. You can look it up. And so it's interesting that we're in a situation where we haven't changed that model or our triage style medical system. It's like we were stuck in these old ideas that we don't even recognize why we got here or how we're here, and I think that's another form of control.
Yes, I strongly agree with that, and I think that my guess is that most of the people, when the question comes up about the due process and writs of habeas corpus, I would assume that most American citizens have no idea whether they're constitutionally protections or not. Right. So when people say it's unreasonable to get it, I think many people who have no idea that what's in the Constitution says, that sounds reasonable to me. Why are we protecting these people, who seem not worthy of protection, and of course, because they don't understand why those protections exist and have never thought about it, have never discussed it with anyone, never heard about it in a classroom, so they said, oh yeah, why should we provide all these protections to criminals, and they say, okay, this sounds reasonable to me. And so it's their ignorance over the Constitution. Like, and Trump is very good at messaging and appealing to these people, like with respect to the issue of now being discussed, with Pam Bondi threatening all these sanctuary cities, even though they are anti-commandeering laws, and that basically she's threatened to ignore the anti-commandeering laws because why? They've already gotten away with ignoring the Constitution. So far they've been rewarded, for ignoring, the Constitution, and they will continue to do that until somebody slaps them and says, okay, not physically, I don't want to be accused of promoting violence, until a limit is placed on them,
Right.
and whether it's Congress or a court, and they can't go further. And who knows, the court they might ignore. I mean, at this point in time, they say that clearly in California, they've made a decision to ignore the courts. Yeah. So with all the statements they made a decision. I think Bove, I guess it's pronounced Bove. I guess Bove made a decision, that they did ignore the courts, and they will continue to ignore the courts, but they'll continue to say they're not ignoring the courts when they are ignoring the courts because Trump's, one of his mantras that he learned from Roy Cohn is never admit, always be on offense and never admit, never apologize, never admit. So and anyone who's successful in his administration has to demonstrate they're going to live by those mantras.
Right.
Yeah. Jeffrey, if I could I want to add a little bit to what you said. It's not an anti-commandeering law. It's in the Constitution. U.S. Supreme Court, and for our audience, anti-commandeering means, according to the U.S. Supreme Court decisions, that the federal government cannot conscript state authorities to enforce a federal law. They have to use federal resources to enforce federal law. And it grows out of a gun control statute, of all things. You'd figure conservatives would understand that, where there's an effort in the Gun Control Act to require state authorities to assist in background investigations and things like that. So it's not just a statute, it's at the level of the Constitution. And Pam Bondi figures, what does that matter? I have an oath to support the Constitution, but I crossed my fingers in the back when I took my oath of office, so I really don't have to comply. Again, another example of there'd be outrage if we had a constitutionally literate society. There'd be impeachment long ago, and it wouldn't have started just with Trump because Biden has impeachable offenses. I once did an enumeration. I went through historically all the impeachable offense presidents have committed from day one. Of course, at the outset, there are virtually none. We're now at about 180 impeachable offenses, and they're all, and Congress ignores virtually every single one of them. And one reason why I believe that there's complacency is because they don't even know what the Constitution means, and they don't even know why. When we're talking today about due process and the reason why you have to have hearings, how many Americans now are taught that we made 120,000 errors in World War II, locking up 120,000 loyal, innocent Japanese Americans because we said we can't give them hearings. We just have to decide they're all have undiluted ties with Emperor Hirohito with no evidence, and therefore they could rot for 40 years. How many people know that? How many people understood that? It took like 20, 30 years for us finally to recognize the error. And the Supreme Court ratified these racist things, without any due process. When you don't have due process, you make errors all of the time. That's why you have judges and an independent judiciary, and that's not taught anymore. That's not.
There's a lot.
And when we finally gave a national apology to the Japanese that were illegally interned, even though Supreme Court allowed it, we later confirmed that was a horrendous decision. There was some financial reparations.
Yeah, reparations. It's called the Civil Liberties Act of 1988. It was signed, by the way, Jeffrey, by Ronald Reagan.
That's what my point is. Who's that great traitor? Okay, Ronald Reagan. We all know. We all confirm Ronald Reagan hated America. Okay, he was woke. Okay, he was a woke president. Okay, He gave reparations to Japanese interns illegally. He gave amnesty to people that came illegally. Okay, so the fact that he won the Cold War, who cares? Okay, so he was busy destroying the country by cutting taxes, deregulating. Okay, trying to slow the growth of government. We know he was a horrible American. And a traitor, and too bad he doesn't live today, because then Trump can sick Pam Bondi on him, and find something they can get on him as well, so he could add him to the enemies list. I mean, so this was a point in time that even people who didn't like Ronald Reagan were proud of being an American.
Yeah.
This is why when Ronald Reagan left office, his popularity was near 70%.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the only modern president who left office more popular than Reagan, for favorability was JFK. So his popularity, his favorable ratings were not only of people who were loyal to the party, but people who were Democrats. Still, when he left office, they liked him and they felt good about being an American. Okay. And because I think because at least, his words inspired people to think about the Constitution and to think about the role of government in society. There were a lot of things he talked about doing that he didn't accomplish, because at the end of the day, you have a process by consensus, and he wasn't able to get a consensus. But his rhetoric never changed. His rhetoric of what his beliefs were. There's one thing of having a belief system, and there's others of trying to, get them implemented into law. And he had enough respect for the Constitution that he didn't try and accomplish everything he strongly believed in. Okay, this is somebody who had strong commitments about many things, and he didn't resort to executive orders because he respected the Constitution. So his respect for the Constitution says, I got to make my best arguments and hope they convince people. Okay. If I can't convince people, I got to keep trying to convince people, but I'm not going to sit back and say that I'm an imperial president, that I'm just going to write executive orders, and expect that I'm going to destroy the Constitution to get the policy I wanted. Okay. Reagan was not prepared to destroy the entire Constitution to get the policies he wanted. And at further part of time, more presidents have decided they are prepared to destroy the Constitution to implement the policies they want to implement.
And to make that point, flash forward to today, bring up the screen share, Jeffrey. This is a current politician, and this is what he recently just put out about Donald Trump. I'll just go to the actual tweet. So Representative Andy Ogle says, give Trump a third term, give him a peace prize, and let him run DC as long as he wants. He's actually getting a lot of pushback about this, which is nice. Of course, even Twitter is like, hey, what about the 22nd Amendment? It's just wild, that this kind of thing, I think that's been trained this way because it benefits people that are seeking power, that they've whether propaganda or different tools they've convinced, or whether even through lack of education or wrong education, convinced Americans that somehow this is okay, driven us to this point where people like that are the ones in power. And to your point, Bruce, I think that's what people then gravitate towards that. And the good people who are actually honorable in our principles don't, because they don't want to be involved with something like that. It's coordinated. I think we're watching it like this.
Like it's very easy. The point I made earlier about the tariffs, it's very easy. It's a very easy thing. If Trump wants to avoid that problem, the Supreme Court should just say to him, which they won't, hey, Donald, if it was going to be that horrible, why did you have to rely upon us making a ruling that's unconstitutional, okay, to support something? Why don't you just go to Congress and ask Congress to ratify everything you've done? That's what you should have done. We should have never gotten to these circumstances, because you just should have gone to Congress. Now, do I think the court will do that? No, I don't. But that's the question. That's the question that that I would ask is, You know, why didn't you do that? That's
Well,
the remedy for all this stuff.
Yeah,
all
to
he's
go
going
off
to do,
Bruce's point,
all he needs to do is go to Congress. That's it.
to go off Bruce's point, it's the whole thing is so what you're going to get from people that are defending it are going to say, well, the Democrats are going to they don't care about the reality, but they'll just stop them because it's Trump, right? Okay, maybe, right? The point though is that's what the reality of the way it's supposed to be. That's the check on power, right? And they're going, look, the system's working. We can't just do what we want. It's like, well, exactly. And even if there is the whole petty back and forth. Well, the reality is that will check itself in its own way, and that we can, as you're saying, put people in different positions. But I think the crux of the point is that they're mad that the system works in a way that checks them and they can't do what they want. And I think that's quite obvious.
You're exactly right. And that goes back. The reason why we have checks is because we understand that the overriding purpose of government is to go protect these unalienable rights, which means you have to have a super consensus. We don't want to have government starting encroaching on those rights. And we've so lost the understanding that that's the reason why the Declaration says we have governments to secure these unalienable rights. It means they're unalienable, means that they're sacred, and even majorities can't go after them. They're protected by the Constitution of the United States, which they are. And pointing out that the tweet or whatever by this Tennessee congressman who's a constitutional illiterate. What ought to happen in a healthy system? The House should expel him by a 2/3 vote for flouting his constitutional obligation to uphold and defend the Constitution. They should expel him. Now, they won't, because everybody else is in peri delicto. But that's what ought to happen. He should be expelled. You can't say that and you say you're a member of Congress. No way. And that's why, and I view it in a different way, when as soon as Biden said, you know what, I can go to war with China over Taiwan on my own. I can go to war against Russia on my own if Putin invades a NATO member. And after he said, as a senator, if President Bush attacked Iran, it'd be an impeachable offense if Congress didn't have a declaration. I said, listen, if he says those things, he's already claimed power that he doesn't have. Really quite frightening power to go to war on his own. I said, that's impeachable. Get rid of him. When Trump said July 23rd, 2019, then on Article 2, these are his words, then under Article 2, I have the right to do anything I want as president, unless that's retracted immediately. You're impeached. You can't say that. It's like standing up and say, you know what? I'm a king. And that's acceptable. That's what the impeachment power is, prophylactic. Impeachment is not to wait till we've already been pushed off a cliff and then try to climb back up. When you have a clear signal that we're dealing with really egomaniacs in the White House, you impeach them and remove them. You do it once, it will not happen again. Well, this idea that it'll have revolving, White Houses, no way. Do it once and it will never happen again. And Congress sits there and does nothing.
So can you change the elimination of mail-in votes through executive order?
No, of course not.
Aren't there two sections of the Constitution that kind of deal with the voting? Article 1, Section 4, and Article 2, Section 1?
Yeah, of course. And it says the state legislatures are going to decide, the conditions, and generally the conditions and the standards for voting in federal elections, unless Congress happens to override it. But it's clear.
Congress, not executive order, right?
Whatever else, you can argue somewhat the distribution of power between the state legislatures and Congress, but it is clear as day that the president is out of the equation, has no role at all. Congress has some, state legislatures have some, executive branch, zero.
Okay. Well, there's a reason he's bringing this up, though, right? Because he's really he's really adamant about, this is an important conversation that needs to be fleshed out. But I think with Trump sticking his fingers into it like this, like you're pointing out, in a way that is only going to, so when people try to say he shouldn't, you're going to claim you hate Trump and his political persecution, whatever. That's the way this always goes. Instead of, to make it simple, I think Trump is sticking his fingers into this because at the end of the day, I don't think they want this system to really change. I think that's really a core part of this. But I think the mail-in ballot thing, somebody I'm close to, Craig Jardula, he's a what do you call it? He travels around and secures elections in different countries and watches, what they do. What do you call that, Bruce?
Oh, and a monitor. He's an election monitor.
Something like that. Yeah.
A poll watcher.
Yes.
election manager.
And he does this, he does this all over the place. He's quite versed on it. And so the point is that, in his mind anyway, that the mail-in ballot is an easy element of manipulation. And that's not to say that Trump should be sticking his hands in this and making these decisions, but I think that is addressable, that there's a problem around that. But then his point about machines, I think this is really where this lies. He's grabbing the low-hanging fruit with the mail-in ballots, because I think a lot of people recognize that there's an issue there. But then the point is the machines, which I think we all, I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the testimony of Clint Curtis going back a while around the manipulation of those state machines. He testified, I have the clip actually, of how he was paid to like manipulate the code and all this. This has been a large conversation for both sides for a long time. I get the sense this is about pointing to a problem that we all recognize. And instead of going to what I argue is the right direction, would be paper ballots, not mail-in, but paper ballots, going to a digital version. I think it's a kind of a different conversation, but I think it's interesting. I think everything's going that direction. And I think it's just more about being able to manipulate the outcomes, which is, I think, what every side wants in all of this. That's kind of my take on all of it. But I think it's an interesting way, because your point being that he shouldn't be executive ordering any of this, let alone executive ordering anything without going through Congress. But, different point.
Right. The point is, we have a system, Ryan, that doesn't say because we're frustrated that we can't reach a consensus on issues that we just leave everything to a dictator. Okay.
Right.
So I can understand why so many Americans are so frustrated. Okay. But I think mostly they have themselves to be frustrated for, because really a government was not designed to do all the things that government does today. I mean,
yes, shouldn't exist in my opinion.
Because we make demands on government that are inappropriate demands we make on government. Okay. And because we make inappropriate demands on government, and then government has been paying out and bribing so many people, lobbying and what other things like that, that the rent extraction business has become so profitable for such a long period of time, because the government interferes with things it was really never contemplated that it interfered with. And for the first 100 years didn't do that. Okay. Mm-hmm. So for 100 years, the government basically stayed there. It was a small, limited government. So people had no reason to be so frustrated at their federal government, because their federal government had nothing to do with their day-to-day lives.
Right.
And that was the point that the founders made, is that the federal government should have nothing to do with people's daily lives. Nothing at all. Nothing at all.
You can even argue not exist, to be quite honest. Like the end of the day, that everything can still function without some centralized overarching hand with the federal government, right? I mean, I get the logic of the origin points of why, but I argue that you could still, with the same kind of system, with leaders of each state, it's the same kind of conversation. So, and what do you think? Back me up on this, Bruce, whether I'm right or wrong, but I think there was even that conversation going back to the origin point, which was debated on, right? About really whether there should be even any centralized power structure outside.
Well, a couple of things. One, they obviously needed a centralized power structure, at least to establish defense, because what was happening under the articles of foreign countries were playing one state off against another, and it could easily result in dissolution. The other area they saw was the protectionism. That is, they wanted a federal government to knock out the protectionist measures that states were erecting to protect their local industries in the name of economic efficiency. That was the Commerce Clause, right? Those were the two areas where you needed federal, other than the Commerce Clause and defense. No, the federal, and maybe they could have a uniform currency, but really is 1863 before you had the National Bank Act. You still had many, many different currencies at that time. But I do think it's fair to say that you would still need a federal adjudicator to make sure you don't have these artificial barriers between the states in having economic competition. And you need a national defense, so that foreign countries can't play one state off against another. But other than those two particular elements, no, they didn't really envision the federal government doing much of anything. And in fact, that is largely speaking true for the first 100 years. Although we had treaties, and like the Louisiana Purchase, we acquired new territories, they became additional states. But when the states came in on equal footing and became states, then the federal government kind of disappeared into the background. But that was the understanding, and it worked. It was a fabulous success story. We attracted the best and the brightest from abroad, entrepreneurs, inventors, all sorts of wonderful human beings who made the United States kind of the beacon of the world, and caused us, we went from a little tiny acorn to a huge giant oak. We were surpassing Germany and Great Britain and France, steel production, all sorts of economic environments. And we had no gauze plan. We had no overall industrial policy. We just let competition and human capital work. And it shows it worked for 100 years until the professional politicians came in and we decided, hey, let's be empire and have monopolies like the British East India Company. The hell with liberty. And that began about 100 years
and
ago.
enter income tax.
And even if you look at the fact of the president, you know, as Jefferson said, the idea was that basically everything would be left to the states and the people, and the only thing the government would get involved in was foreign policy. And but if you think about how to look at foreign policy, there was a significant check on the president because why? My foreign policy, I negotiate with countries, and I want to have tariffs. I got to go to Congress. I negotiate with companies. I want to have a treaty. I got to get it authorized by Congress. If I want to go to war, I got to go to Congress. Okay, and in the end, I cannot deploy the soldiers anywhere because, on the most part, the government was made up of militias, and a lot of times, you know, and Bruce probably knows the history of this. You know, even during the War of 1812, there was a debate about some states didn't want to supply the militias because they wanted to make sure that when they were fighting the British, they weren't going to Canada, so they weren't willing to support the militias if the militias were going to go to Canada. So they only wanted the militias to be used to protect the homeland itself, but not to go outside the homeland. So some states actually decided that they would not allow their militias to fight in the War of 1812. You know, if there was not the guarantee, they would not be used. So think about I'm commander in chief. But I'm a commander in chief that has to go to all the states and say, you know, get your militias ready, and then the people saying, well, I'll get it ready to make sure. Show me that you have an act of Congress that says, you know, that you can do this. War is declared, you know, and making sure I'm only going to send the people under those rules. So it was it's not like I press a button and I'm bombing Iran. Okay,
Right.
The president never contemplated that he could sit and have nuclear weapons and say, today I want to press a button and bomb this, and I can do this all without speaking to Congress. Okay, no way was that considered. Okay, the possibility. Yes, if there was a surprise attack, clearly you'd want the president to respond before there's an attack, if there's an attack on the homeland. But Bruce, do you see anything in the constitutional argument that really said the president gets up one day and decides I want to bomb a whole bunch of countries?
No. In fact, the hypothetical you raised, that was understood by the framers, and they said in the debate in the convention over the war power, said, well, but the president still can respond to a sudden attack that had already broken the peace, because at that time we were not initiating war. We were already at war because we'd been attacked by another country. And in those circumstances, if the president sees ICBMs coming in, okay, we're already at war. He can respond. And the framers understood that. But the idea that a president on his own could just pick up, you know, like Trump, well, I'll bomb the heck out of Iran because I feel like it. Or Obama, I'll bomb the heck out of Libya because I feel like it. No way. You know, they had been shocked. If the first Congress were sitting at the time Trump acted against Iran and Obama acted against Libya, they had been impeached and removed in 5 seconds.
I just really like what you framed there, Jeffrey, about, you know, so what's funny, if you bring this up in a certain conversation today, people would make arguments about why that makes us weak and defenseless. But what's interesting is, again, it's kind of like the analogy of like the car and what we talked about is that, you know, at the end of the day, why wouldn't it be the state's right to be like, well, do you have Congress's approval? Is that something we agree with? Does it align with the Constitution? Like, I love the idea that you can have that power and be like, well, you know, as our state, we don't think you're doing this within the Constitution. Now, yes, maybe that might cause conflicts. Yes, maybe that could be abused by dishonest politicians. But the point all day has been made is that with the system set that way, there's checks and balances on power, and we should err on the side of that as opposed to being, you know, unlimited centralized power. You know, now we have a standing army. Now we have all the things, everything we were warned about, you know, and we still can't seem to grasp. But back to your point about education, I agree. That's why it is. But I just want people to think about that, the way you frame that, Jeffrey, that, you know, that's clearly how that's supposed to work. And I even argue going back to militias and as opposed to a standing army, like you have to marshal these things and there has to be thought put into it. You know, it just like it makes much more sense.
But I think one of the great deficiencies, you know, in our thinking is thinking that because a system is maybe imperfect in one instance, you throw out the system. I always go back. If you can't find a cure better than the disease, stick with the disease. Of course, there are going to be deficiencies because we're dealing with human nature. We're dealing with human beings. But all experience teaches that our system is the best. It's the optimal. You can't improve upon it, even though it's not perfect. So stick with it, because whatever you come up with to try to circumvent what we have is going to create something far worse than what we have. I say it sets a precedent, lies around like a loaded weapon, and the circumstances come, that weapon will be used and destroy everything. So yeah, separation of powers in some circumstances can be a handicap, but it's the best that we have. And to throw out, the bath with the bed water, I have that upside down. It makes no sense whatsoever. Of course, there are going to be imperfections, but what we know is that you can't improve on what we have enjoyed for 235 years. That's a pretty good track record. Nothing in the history of world government, world politics has ever shown that there's anything superior to separation of powers, even though it's short of perfection.
Well, maybe save for what Jeffrey and I would argue and getting rid of government entirely, but that's a different conversation. But no, I agree with you, Bruce. Well,
get rid of government entirely.
I would get rid of government entirely.
No, you end up with a Paris Commune if you get rid of Paris Commune. Gives you a glimpse of what happens when you don't have any government at all.
Go ahead, Jeffrey. Go ahead.
I accept a Jeffersonian interpretation of the Constitution, more so than Madisonian perspective. I mean, I do like, I do think that the writings of Calhoun, to some extent, were based upon the writings of Jefferson on states' rights to secede, and I do believe in nullification. So ultimately, if you have a rogue government on all levels, that it's up to the people, to then have the right to nullify a government that's gone rogue. So in order to protect their own rights. So if they have to go and sit on a jury, and decide that, the government has gone rogue and the courts are upholding, if the courts are basically upholding the rights of government over the rights of peoples and their inalienable rights, that, jurors should have the right to nullify in court and saying, this person might be guilty of everything you said, but the law is an ass, so we're nullifying the decision because the law is an ass. So I do believe that ultimately it should be up to the people, and I think the way for the government for that to happen is through nullification, and I don't think that the union should be kept together through force. So this country was created through an act of consent. Okay. So we had an Articles of Confederation after when we declared independence. That was an act of consent, right? People, all the colonies got together and they consented to sign the Declaration of Independence. Okay. Nobody had a gun pointed to them, and no one was coerced into their signatures. They all signed that, with consent. After that, the Articles of Confederation were a product of consent. Okay. Then when they decided to create a constitutional convention, that was an act of consent. The signing of the Constitution, okay, the execution of its ratification was all of act of consent. So I don't think the parties were consenting to say, if there's a breach, we're stuck here no matter what. If a party believes there's a breaching party to the document they consented, they felt their remedy was to exit. And
Jeffrey, I think that's incomplete, because the segue from the Articles of Confederation to the U.S. Constitution was quite clear. The Articles of Confederation were described as a compact amongst the states.
Right.
The states formed the Articles of Confederation. They all signed. The
Right.
first three words of the Constitution is "We, the people of the United States."
Right.
And that was an earthquake change, which has caused Patrick Henry and some to oppose the Constitution. Madison supported it, including Jefferson. Now, the idea, of course, is that, okay, if we, the people of the United States, created the Constitution, we, the people, can amend it, right? We can amend the Constitution there, so it's not a fossil, it's not a petrified forest. But the whole idea that, and this is the precedent, doesn't have any limitation, that any state could decide, well, I don't like this X, I'm seceding. It means the whole system breaks down, because you would have to ask, well, what about the boundaries of the state? That's just there by happenstance, right? I mean, West Virginia kind of seceded from Virginia. And you set the principle it's going to destroy government completely. And if that's what you want, that's what's going to happen. Because any state, any sub-state, any city can say, okay, we're going to have our own sovereignty, which is clearly what would happen at the local level, which is why you'll find that those who are present.
And I like that outcome.
Right, right.
If somebody's part of a deal where they've made a judgment that it's better off, I'm better off by myself than being formed this compact. Okay. And if they decide, that almost every contract has an exit strategy. Okay. There's whatever people, when they sign agreements, there's always a way to dissolve the agreement. Okay. Nobody signs an agreement that says, here's a pact, and no matter what happens, okay, the most important thing is this pact is kept forever. No, there's a pact, and the pact is convenient for parties as long as all parties who contracted to it think it's beneficial. And if they don't think it's beneficial, there's usually a dispute resolution process. And if that fails, there's usually a process for dissolving a buy-sell agreement. There's some way of basically exiting the agreement.
But Rev. Jeffrey,
I think all agreements should have exit options.
Hold on.
That's the exit option, Jeffrey. The exit option is Article 5 of the Constitution. I mean, some states said, hey, if we don't have a Bill of Rights, we want to go. And so we had a Bill of Rights. It's an amendment. There are only two things that can't change through the amendment process, right? You can't change. One is obsolete. You can't prohibit, the slave trade before 1808. And then the second one, we got to have two states. I mean, states have equal rights in the Senate, but they can be directly. Other than that, the people remain. That's the exit strategy. We had Prohibition Amendment, then we repealed the Prohibition Amendment. And you can repeal amendments that are there now. You can add new amendments, but that's the exit strategy.
I think
it doesn't bind you forever.
I don't think we're going to agree on the substance, because I think that's the important point to make, is that we clearly at the end point have slightly different ideas of the way. Like, my point, let me make clear, is that I think that government as an entity, we are better off as a society, a species, without that. Now, that's my personal opinion. I will always err on the side of personal liberty and freedom, same way you do, Bruce. But my point is that if it comes down to, like Jeffrey's pointing out, that as a state, as a county, that we collectively decide that we don't want to be a part of this because of X, Y, and Z, because of our personal liberty, whatever that is, then we should have that right. Like, I think that's what's enshrined in the Constitution.
I don't want to disagree with you. And the Declaration of Independence acknowledges that. And it says, okay, we don't want to, we understand that warfare and rebellion has possible mischief. But when it says a government, is clear that it's out to tyrannize you and destroy your rights, you have a right to overthrow it and have new safeguards, right? It has a high threshold at the tyranny before you do that. But but at that point, we're not talking about law, right? We're just talking about the law of the jungle. And they acknowledge it.
This is a philosophical difference. This is a philosophical difference. Because
they're saying that they're acknowledging what you're saying, Ryan. At some point, when the government, even acting within its terrain, becomes very clearly tyrannical, the people have a right to stand up and overthrow it.
Right.
Now, one of the things that, and when the Civil War came, Lincoln was saying, well, what's the tyranny? We have this Fugitive Slave Act. We've lowered tariffs. There wasn't any legitimate bona fide beef that the South had to secede. They had a dominance in Congress. They had elected most of the presidents. What's the gripe? Their ability, but they didn't care about states' rights. They supported the Fugitive Slave Act, which was the most anti-slave rights bill in the history of the United States, enabling the federal marshals to run in anyway. That was not about it. I'll tell you what it was really about. The South could see that their dominance of the government was going to fade away because the new states coming in couldn't support slavery, whether they wanted it or not. It just wasn't viable. You're not going to grow cotton in the middle of Arizona. And they see their power waning. Said, we need to get out now. Because if we don't get out now, we're going to be ciphers. We've been dominant for all these years in the Congress and the executive branch. We're not going to. That's why they did it. It was a power play. It had nothing to do with states' rights. Indeed, in the Confederate Constitution, it said, no state can emancipate its slaves. That's the states' rights for you. no state can emancipate its
Well,
slaves.
look,
Wait a minute,
again,
I thought you were in favor
there's
of
so many
states'
ways to go
rights.
down this. If it comes down to the people of this location collectively truly deciding what that society wants, then that's for that society to. This is my again. I will always err on that. So what I want to get to is when it comes down to a philosophical.
Trump or any
difference between-
president.
Hold on. It comes down to a philosophical difference between whether or not we think that the government, like at the end of the day, the government can ultimately decide that it is in power and that we can't pull away from that. But I think that government is the problem when it comes down to, I guess, let me make the simple point because I can go in so many ways. Philosophical difference on whether or not we feel that without government there will be chaos. And I think the answer, there's a lot of examples throughout history that show that anarchism, not chaos, but a society that's run with there's rules but no rulers can succeed. Now, we debate that all day long, but that's where it comes down to. And I think we can happily disagree on that. And we all agree on the liberty aspect of this. But I think it comes down to if, as a society, we decided or a state that we don't want to be a part of that for whatever reason, that is our choice. And even if that means we want to create a society with no government at all and we just have a different style of running, I think that's true freedom. But I get what you're saying, Bruce, and I get how it can be abused. But doesn't that go back to the same point we were making before about how, the abuse of it?
But
I agree.
Read the history of the Paris Commune. Then maybe you'll change your mind, but you might not.
Examples of bad stuff too. I trust me, but I think it's about marching to the beat of your own drum.
Yes, and I echo everything Ryan said, so I don't need to repeat it because I agree with everything Ryan said, but I would just like to add to it. And the comment I would like to add to it is, look, if Trump or any president, because I don't want to make this just about Trump, sends a military in and declares, I want to implement the Insurrection Act. And I consider California insurrectionists. Okay, look, they're changing the gerrymandering. The gerrymandering I consider an act of insurrection, and I'm going to send the military in. Okay,
seems logical with what's going on
me,
today.
California should have the right to say, "No way, I'm not acknowledging you. I've left the United States, and you're now an invading army, and I'm going to have my state militia fight against your invading army." And I think they should have the right to do that. Okay, if we're giving the right to any president, whether it's Trump or anyone else, to basically go in and set tariff policies against congressional oversight, to bomb people and tax people, to bomb people without an act of war, okay, to go in and send the military in and militarize, functions that are supposed to be executed by state and local authorities, and if the processes in D.C., either the Congress or the courts don't protect them and don't protect the people living and have taken away their inalienable rights. I think the state has said, you've taken away my inalienable rights. You've broken the contract with me, because that's the contract that you have. The contract that you have is that you have to preserve my inalienable rights. You've broken that contract. So I have no choice other than to exit, because you forced my exit, because you violated my rights. And so far, you've been able to get away with it because you've accumulated the power to get away with it. And the only recourse I have is by saying, I'm not going to be subject to your jurisdiction anymore. Okay? So I think that's perfectly reasonable.
Well, and one last thing. I think that's important to bring it together is that I think that and this is the way I say it on my show all the time, is if we are forced to live within a state of society, meaning just, a government over kind of in control, then what I agree with you, then what we have with this setup that's being bastardized right now is the best that we could possibly hope for, as I've seen throughout history. So I completely agree with that. I just hold the additional opinion that I think we could strive for something beyond even that. Like, is that, I guess, where government is not the overarching kind of control structure of how we live our lives, but that we are within the society. We're on the exact same page, Bruce, just to make that clear.
That's where we were, going back a couple hundred years. Mm-hmm. But the problem, I think, with Jeffrey's analysis is, number one, the framers, the Declaration says you need to try all your alternatives short of secession, which means, you have to go to court. They would have standing to claim that this was an abuse of the Insurrection Act. Maybe courts would rule against them, but secession is not the first, but it's the last option that you refer to. But then you run into huge problems with the precedent. How do you confine it? A state says, hey, Joe Biden's not enforcing the immigration laws. It's creating havoc in my state. We're seceding, right? Now, how can you say that?
I'm okay with that too. If Texas wants to,
then you're going to say, then another state is going to stand up and say, well, even in California, let us say California secedes, and then Los Angeles says, listen, San Francisco and the North has too much of the water. The heck, we're going to secede. So then you have and then San Diego says, well, I'm going to secede. And so what you would end up, in my judgment, and of course, we understand it's some speculation because we're calculating the future. You'd end up with the United States looking like 25 or 30 mini states, constantly warfare with each other. There'd be pro-bearsing. The first thing that would jump up would be protectionist measures to make sure that nobody compete with the local politicians because they've got it. You got to remember, Jeffrey, the people who are in power making those judgments, they're a sociopaths like the federal people are. They're not doing this because they're standing on states' rights. I say the reason the Civil War wasn't states' rights. It was who's going to get the power. And these people in California are as power hungry as the ones in Washington and everywhere else.
Right.
And you're going to end up with warfare after warfare after warfare, petty states everywhere. The German Confederation would look like unity compared to what the United States.
But with that analogy, these are governments still.
Let me give you another example of why I still think I hear your argument. I don't agree. I respect it, but I don't agree. Right now, what you have is what almost nobody's talking about. You have all these National Guards from various states going in to defend. Well, why states are volunteering to do it, I don't know. Well, I know why, but they want to make Trump look successful, in implementing this policy. So what we have is we're federalizing one thing is the federal government can say, I want to spend more money. The Washington D.C. can say, I need more cops. Give me more money. Okay. But instead of the local residents paying for their own protection, what they're doing is all the taxpayers of the whole country are paying to defend people in D.C. Okay, because that's what it means. They took the people who work for the federal government, who they paid for by. Are they paid by uniquely the people in D.C. or are they paid for by all the people? Okay, so basically D.C. is having their police subsidized. So now if the states go in and say, gee, you know what? I'm gonna send in the military, into New York and Chicago and all these other locations. I'm gonna clean them all up. Yeah, I'm cleaning them all up, help clean them all up, because no longer are those local jurisdictions responsible for funding their own security. People from other states are funding their security. Okay. So I sit back and say, I'm not having my money. Why do I care about my money funding the security of people? I live in California or Michigan or Wyoming and or Florida, and why do I want to pay for the security of people in D.C. or New York or the city I don't live in? Okay, I don't want to have money taken out of my pocket, for things like that. Maybe, yes, there should be a debate. There should be more of a conversation about people, the transfer of wealth, where the government are taking money from people who live in one state to benefit people who live in another state. But of course, the counting is not very clear on this, and people really don't know how much of their money they're putting into D.C. is being used for the benefit of the people, the constituents of that state, or they're subsidizing people who live in another state who has a powerful politician who can extract rent from other people in the country. So at some point, this system after we created, again, I insist, and they're probably linked to each other. I insist this problem all started with fiat money, okay? The creation of the Fed and fiat money. We didn't have this system when the government couldn't print money, okay? When the government had no income tax. 1913, we destroyed this country, okay? That's the year we destroyed the country, okay? We implemented the income tax. We created the Fed. We had direct elections of senators, okay? That was it. Now, to some extent, why did we have the income tax? There's two reasons we had the income tax. One is to fight wars because we wanted to be an empire. The other reason is the bankers wanted the federal government to guarantee the deposits, liabilities. Okay, and if the government has no money, what's the value of their guarantee if the government has no money? So the government has to have the capacity of honoring their guarantee, and at that point in time, the deposit liabilities, the financial system, were a lot more money than the government's capacity to generate any income. So the government needed to be able to tax people to be able to honor to back up the guarantees to the financial system. So that's one of the reasons why we got the income tax, was to support bankers. We wanted to support bankers, and we wanted to support the warfare state. So
the warfare state comes first. Jeffrey, the warfare state comes first, just like before the British Empire took off, they had to create a Bank of England, right? You need a central bank to run warfare. It's no accident that 1914 is the World War I, and then we're de facto into the war day one, and then formally became part of World War I in 1917. But the real beginning, I think, of the end of America
when they went to Jekyll Island to create the central bank, when the bankers went to Jekyll, it was all about creating a banking cartel.
Right.
They first call it a banking cartel. That was the initial name of it. Okay. The initial name was a Banking Cartel Act. Okay.
Yes.
And why did they go after 1907 when they were the concerns? They had to go in and bail out some of them, when bankers had to bail out, when money center banks had to bail out other banks so they would preserve confidence in the system. They said, why are we putting our money in? Let's get money from the government to do this for us. We don't want to put up our own capital anymore. We want the government to do it. The British have a lender of last resort. We don't want to be the lenders of last resort. So it was driven by the economics. They were not thinking about going to war. They didn't want to be the lenders of last resort. They wanted the government to take over that responsibility.
Jeffrey, listen, I understand that there are multiple causes behind anything significant. But the reason why the Fed actually was enacted, we're already a warfare state. After not only the Philippines and the Spanish-American War, we're into Panama in 1903. We're into Mexico, 1910. We're into Nicaragua. We're into Haiti. We're into everywhere. We're already running a South American Caribbean empire. And the politicians are smart, and so is Wilson. I'm saying these are things that are built into the empire mentality that don't ever find overt expression. Of course, they're not going to say, let's have the Fed so we'll go into World War I. But that's, in fact, what is the underlying subconscious thrust that moves this forward. And then, of course, we have McAdoo saying, of course, we can't tax the people to fight World War I. We're going to have to sell all these bonds, get the Fed. And the same exact chronology happens just before Britain becomes a big empire. They had to have a central bank to fund the warfare state. And that's ultimately what happened. I'm not saying that they're not also collateral forces and incentives at work, but that's really what was going on. And once we're into the warfare state, it's either never going back again, which is where we are at present.
From my perspective, I get the nuance from both the arguments, but you're kind of saying the same thing. It's just chicken or the egg, like what started. It ultimately is driven by the same mindset. And I think that's important to see right there, but I'm gonna have to drop off here pretty quick. But I was just wanted to add that, from the way I see this, and this is such an important conversation. Like, hopefully, maybe we can win you over, Bruce, to see more from our side about the government. But I think that it comes down to, like I said, a difference on how we think we could progress beyond the problem we see. And I think all of it seems to stem back to what we even the founders recognize, that it'll almost always end up in despotism, and that we have to be aware of that, be vigilant toward that. But is it possible that we could have something that's not inevitably going to fall to that? Maybe not, but I think it's worth having these conversations. And I'll just add that the point we're making about the inevitability of let's say states secede, then it's one after another. And, it's kind of the same argument from before though, right? That if our point is that we can't do the thing, even if the legal reality we highlighted, that should be allowed, right? Regardless of the reason, the states have that right. So if we start saying, well, not because of this, or we can't allow it like that, it's sort of the same thing we're saying before, is that because of the potential problem, we're going to stop you from doing what is technically constitutionally valid, And so it's I think we tend to have a lesser opinion of what societies will do if left to their own devices. And I think that's partially a manipulation, that I'd like to believe that we could have a society without these kind of centralized control structures. And for one, I would personally at least like to see if that's possible, but that's why this is important, this conversation right here, because we all share the idea of what's most important, and I said, since we are in this state of society, we're all on the same path here of trying to fight to, preserve liberty and freedom and constitutional rights.
Yeah, you mean that it's possible if you have education and a culture of restraint, but Madison was the one who understood it's futile. He writes, why do we have government? Because men aren't angels. Why do we have government? Because men are evil and they're driven by ulterior motives. And he says, we can't rely upon George Washington once every 500 years to save us. It's not going to happen. So we have to rely upon the fact they're going to be scoundrels. And the fact is, my perception of human nature is worse than yours. I think that the species is so bad. We are the warfare. We're the killer species. We kill for the drop of a straw that a lion or a tiger would never kill for the trivial purposes we do. We have a monopoly of our genius dedicated to greater proficiency in killing one another. No other species has that genius dedicated to that particular ugly, sordid motive. But putting that aside, it really is a question, and I am like you and Jeffrey. My view of the greatest possible society is everybody gets to march to their own drum. Everybody has equal dignity. Government should be zero. People should do the right thing because of their inner conscience, because they would be ostracized by that society if they didn't do the right thing. But I think that that's not going to happen. There's going to be you, me, and Jeffrey doing the ostracism. Otherwise, they're going to feel nothing. I mean, it's what happens in Congress. All these people who are bad people, you think they get any ostracism? They have zero up there. That's why they continue to do it. They're all in their own club. So it's a matter of calculation of, well, what do you think the least bad alternative is? And
I'll still fight for it regardless. I think we all would, right? Whenever we see that light at the end of the tunnel, I get you, trust me, but I'm still going to fight for that because I believe that there's something there, that's important.
I'm fighting with you, Ryan. So, but I think one thing we do agree upon is that to the extent that there's an empire needs a central bank and needs fiat paper money. Okay. Yeah. The founding fathers, Madison, one of the main motivations of Madison wanting to have the Constitutional Convention was the issuing of paper money, for circulation of paper money in the states. Yeah. So Franklin said that probably a revolution might have been avoided if it wasn't for the pollution of money. Okay, and the original Constitution had separation of money from the state. So so that the intention was to separate money from the state, and that the state would not be issuing paper money. That's why money was defined in specific exchange rate with respect to gold and silver. So and what has funded the warfare state is fiat paper money. Yeah. So at the end of the day, the banksters and the military industrial complex are partners. Okay,
yes, exactly.
And that partnership and who funds that partnership is the central bank. So in the absence of a central bank, so we need to solve, if we want limited government, our founders believed it was impossible to have limited government and fiat paper money. So if we want to have a limited government, we got to abolish the Fed, and we got to have, and we got to either go back to a gold standard, a Bitcoin standard, or
just free exchange,
legal tender laws, and let people for themselves decide.
Yes, I love that.
Decide what form of value that people want to engage in transactions, and why should the government even be interfering with the people exchanging value in the way they want to exchange value? Why should the government have an interest in supporting a national currency? The whole point was the government in the beginning didn't have an interest in promoting a national currency.
And you can have both. You can have both as long as you allow people to exchange freely what they want, not have laws restricting that. Sure, have a currency that can be central that people can use, but allow them to do gold or here's my shoes for your shirt. It shouldn't.
The other element, Jeffrey, that you omitted, we got to get rid of the income tax.
Yeah,
he's got to get rid of that.
Yes.
Is the key to getting back to the downsized government and true federalism.
Right. I've always said abolish the Fed, abolish the income tax.
Which is why Trump feigned both of those things before he got elected again, right? Both of those things.
Abolish the Fed, abolish the income tax. There's no way we will return to a constitutional order without doing both. We got to abolish the income tax.
I agree with that.
We got to abolish the Fed. There's no way people should have those type of, one is, the government should never need that type of money that it needs to implement an income tax. And the second thing is that no citizen should be required to give all that information to the government. It's just intrusive. It's intrusive of giving that information. Why should the government have any claim against the product of our work efforts? Okay.
That's Jefferson's first inaugural. But I think that we can get there only through, I call, constitutional literacy. We need to, we'll get there. We'll build what I call the intellectual infrastructure to get there only if we say you're not graduating from high school unless you can pass a constitutional literacy test that I'll prepare and I will grade.
Okay.
I agree.
I said, Ryan, I think you said you had to go. So Ryan, Bruce, why don't you have your last words and again, thank you again for always a wonderful conversation.
Yeah.
And
Well,
go ahead.
I mean, just to close here is to show the kind of nature that we have now at the executive branch. But again, I don't want to pick on Trump. Now we have this so-called summit, between Trump and it's much ballyhooed and all these things. It's not going to amount to anything. But now it looks like we're going to bring. We now have Trump, who hates NATO, now is going to provide Ukraine with all the NATO protections of Article 5, in order to get a peace prize. I mean, how can you keep two ideas opposite to each other and think there's anything coherent about any of this stuff? This is complete madness. Why are we even over there? We have Trump sitting in the Oval Office today. He's got half the leaders of Western Europe and Russia and Zelensky there. What George Washington will look at that and come back and say, what in the heck? Didn't you read my farewell address? Kick all these people out. That's their problem. That's Europe's problem, not ours. Get out there. We wish you well. Follow our example. We're not getting involved. I mean, this shows you how far gone we are from the original contemplation of how our government was going to operate on the world stage. Influenced by example, but not going abroad in search of monsters to destroy.
Right. Yeah. And on top of that, the point is that, what we're seeing, and whether Biden or Obama or Trump or any of them, they will tell you what they think you want to hear. Right. That's why right there, NATO bad, because at the moment that was what people wanted to hear. And, who knows, maybe one of them he actually thinks. The point is neither guide his choices. It's about what is going to benefit the outcome, what the agenda. And it's just self-evident. I think it is becoming more obvious by the day. But this is the answer in a large way. Obviously, like we're talking about, educating yourself, making sure, we make that a societal thing, but just having more conversations like this. And look, honestly, I genuinely think this and others and every other show doing it is changing the conversation. I'm actually much more positive right now, as much as things are getting intense and insane. I think it's a reaction to the fact that people are just a little bit more aware, a little more inquisitive, going, I don't know about this anymore, because there are people like us out there going, hey, doing jumping jacks, going, did you even read that thing? It's clear that people are starting to just wake up a little bit, and it does give me hope, so thank you for doing this. I'm glad to do it every Monday, and I think it's a refreshing moment to have these kind of conversations. And look, even we'll disagree on the outcome of government at the end of the day, but we all agree on what really matters, which is just personal liberty, man. It's got to be a focal point. Thanks, guys.
Well, my concluding words will just be housekeeping issues. I'm traveling next Monday, so I'll be gone for 2 weeks. So we will not do this next Monday or the Monday after that, and then we'll resume 3 weeks from today. So when I'm traveling, I have a pretty full schedule, and enjoy some time with enjoy New York. So see some shows and some other things. So I will be having a good time, and I don't want to break up my day to go to my hotel room to have this conversation. No offense. I love this conversation very much.
We're on recess. Congress is still on recess, Jeffrey. So you're not listening.
So for the next, and for the audience to know, for the next 2 weeks there'll be no Fein Points. So I think I'm doing 2 podcasts on Wednesday, and that'll be it for me until I get back in the end of the first week of the 25th. Yeah. I think for 2 weeks we will not be doing this, and then I'll be back. We'll resume. So thank you both. Have a great day and a great week, and thanks again for the wonderful conversation.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, thanks.